In the summer of 1947, the days were long, warm, and full of adventure. A group of boys from a small village near a big cold forest spent their time exploring the woods. They pretended to be soldiers running around with sticks as they were rifles, imagining battles like the ones their father has fought in during the war. They'd shout commands, dive behind fallen logs, and march through the undergrowth like little heroes in their own made-up battles. The forest became their battlefield, fortress, and secret kingdom all at once. Mark was the fastest of all the boys. His laughter echoed through the trees and he dashed between the trunks pretending to be a brave captain. His best friend Tom tried to keep up, but Mark always pulled ahead, daring and bold. The forest felt like their kingdom, a place where there could be anything they wanted. They climbed trees like mountain peaks, crossed fallen logs like narrow bridges over deep chasms, and built forts out of branches and leaves where they held secret meetings. But suddenly Mark tripped over something hidden under the pile of leaves and roots. He stumbled and fell, sending dirt and moss flying. When he looked down, he saw something shocking: a skeleton. It was the remains of a soldier, his bones yellowed with time and scraps of tattered fabric still clinging to them. The sight of it froze Mark in place, his heart pounding. The bones were twisted and the rusted shape of what had once been a helmet lay nearby, dented and cracked. The other boys gathered around, their games forgotten. The empty eye sockets of the skull stared at them like dark holes leading to nowhere. They whispered nervously, wondering who the soldier was and how long he had been there. But Mark noticed something else. In the bony hand of the skeleton was an old key. It was made of bronze, covered with strange Celtic symbols and tiny flowers carved into the metal. The designs twisted and curled in ways that made Mark's skin prickle, as if the patterns were shifting when he wasn't looking directly at them. Mark felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Carefully he pulled the key from the skeleton's hand. Oddly, it felt warm even though the forest air was cool. He has put the key into his pocket, and they all went to call the adults. Soon the police arrived, asking questions. "Did you find anything unusual?" the officer asked, looking closely at each boy with sharp, suspicious eyes. Mark quickly shook his head, hiding the key in his pocket. His heart raced. He didn't want to tell them about the key. It felt like it's his secret, something meant only for him. The officer lingered for a moment, but eventually he moved on because, well, it was post-war time. Finds like this were pretty common. A few days later, Mark couldn't stop thinking about the key. At night he would take it out and turn it over in his hands, staring at those strange symbols that seemed to shift in the flickering light of his lantern. Sometimes he thought he heard faint whispers when he held it close, but he told himself it was just an imagination. He decided he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. Behind an old barn, he pulled the key from his pocket and showed it to his friends. "I found this," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. The boys crowded around, squinting at the key. Tom, the oldest boy, laughed. "It's just an old key, probably from a treasure chest of something. You're making a bigger deal than it is, Mark." The other boys laughed too, and Mark felt his face burn with embarrassment. He clenched the key tightly in his fist, and without saying a word, he turned and ran back into the forest. The trees wouldn't laugh at him, at least. They felt like the only place where the secret mattered. Mark ran deeper into the woods, deeper than ever before, into places untouched by war. The trees here were ancient, with thick twisted roots and moss hanging like old curtains. The sunlight barely made it through the dense leaves, casting strange shadows on the ground that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. The forest grew quieter, the sound of birds and insects fading until there was only crunch of leaves under his feet and the pounding of his heart. Breathing hard, Mark stopped to rest. That's when he saw it, a massive oak tree, taller and older than any tree he'd ever seen. Its bark was rough and dark, with strange markings carved into it, almost like symbols on the key. The roots twisted around the base like giant frozen snakes, and nestled among them was something odd, a keyhole. His heart raced. Was this what the key was for? With shaking hands, he took out the key and slid it to the keyhole. A loud groaning sound filled the forest as the root moved and cracked apart, revealing a dark hole beneath the tree. Mark stepped back. The hole seemed impossibly deep, as if it led to another world. A faint cold breeze drifted up from the darkness, carrying whispers that tickled his ears. From the darkness, a small, glowing fairy-like creature with wings floated up. It looked kind, with bright eyes and gentle smile, its voice like soft chimes. "Don't be afraid," the creature said softly. "You have set me free. I was trapped here by bad people a long time ago. Thank you." Strangely, Mark felt his fear fade away. The creature seemed friendly. It reached out a small hand, and Mark shook it without hesitation. Its skin was cool and smooth like polished stone. As they touched, Mark felt a strange tingle run up his arm like a tiny spark of electricity. "By the way," the creature said, its smile growing wider, almost too wide, revealing sharp teeth hidden behind its lips, "what's your name? I need to know it to thank you properly." Mark hesitated, but then answered, "Mark." The creature's grin stretched even wider, and its eyes grew dark and strange, flickering like candle flames. But Mark didn't feel scared or hurt. He felt empty, like something important inside him was gone, something he didn't even know he needed. The whispers grew louder for a moment, then faded, leaving only silence. Moments later, the world faded. Mark went home later that day. He kinda looked the same, talked the same, and even smiled the same, almost. But his mother noticed something was different. His eyes didn't have the same sparkle. They seemed too still, too deep, like a pond with no ripples. And when he smiled, it wasn't quite right. It was as if he was still Mark, but not really him anymore. Just a shell filled with something that had power over his name.